Hey everybody, today I will be hand rubbing out my blades. I'm using Matador sandpaper from Germany. I'm starting with the first step at 1200 grit. I'll use small strips of the sandpaper like this. I'll put Ronsel lighter fluid on the blade. I use lighter fluid because it evaporates and doesn't leave a greasy residue. And I will back my sandpaper with a strip of leather. This is just normal leather and has turned black over time due to grit and lighter fluid and all of that stuff getting caught up in it. But it's just a normal strip of leather. All right, so I've marked out how I kind of break this up in my mind. So I've got kind of the tip, and then right past the tip, and this section is kind of right where it's going to start forking off into different areas. Then we've got along this little grind right here, and then along the spine, the center of the grind, and the cutting edge, and then the plunge area. And so I'll kind of work each one of these sections, by itself. And then once I feel that I've got all of the grind marks out, I will come back in and I'll just kind of do everything together, blend it all together, make sure all the lines are moving this way. You don't want any, fish hooked ugly lines. You don't want any scratches left from the grinder going this way. You want everything to go the same direction from the plunge towards the point of the knife.
Here we have a New York Special ground out to 600 grit cork belt, and I will use the 1200 grit sandpaper to hand rub all the machine marks out of it. So I am starting at the tip of the knife and working up towards the plunge. You don't have to do that. You could start at the plunge and work your way to the tip if you want, but I would suggest trying to start the same way every time so that you know that you'll start and finish at the same point every time and not forget to do a step in between. The same goes for the orientation of the blade. When I start hand rubbing, I will always have the main bevel or cutting edge facing the right side so that I know I'm starting with that grind, and then by the time that I flip this over and I've got to the other grind, that I have done all 4 grinds. So if the main cutting edge is on the left, I know that I've already done the other side. You can tell here that I am favoring the center grind line along that little swoop in the S grind, and I will work my way up along the center grind where it starts to get straightened out there. I'm pressing pretty hard here. The first grit is the toughest grit, trying to get those machine marks out. So you'll have to apply a little bit of pressure there to get beneath them. So right here I am looking and using the light to try to identify marks that I've left behind and missed. And I will come back through and I'll circle them with my Sharpie, and that will give me an idea of the areas that I need to focus on and try to get those scratches out. Like I've said in other videos, identifying marks left by previous grits is extremely important, and the better you get at identifying these marks, the less you'll have to come back and redo a grit because you've gone past and now you're at 2000 grit instead of 1200 grit, and you realize that you've missed some 600 grit marks, so you got to go back to the 12 and get those out, and then come back to the 2000 and get those 1200 grit marks out. So the sooner you can identify a mark and then just get it out, the better off you're going to be in the long run. So it looks as if I've got one of the marks out at least that I had left behind. So I'm going to go ahead and get that one out, and I'll just focus on the cutting edge of the knife and really just try to press down hard on that one area until I've got that mark out. With hand rubbing, it's unlikely that you're going to put any kind of serious dip in the blade. So you can, with the 1200, work an area, pretty precisely and not have to worry about messing up the finish of your blade. So you can see me kind of rocking back and forth and a little side to side here, and that's me trying to get the light to run across the areas that I know that there were marks, and making sure that those marks are gone before I move on to the next area. So here I am running along the grind line and really just shoving my thumb right up against the edge of the grind, trying to make sure that I'm getting all of those scratches out along that center grind line. Once the lighter fluid has evaporated, I will just take a look and make sure that I've gotten where I want to get, or else I'll put more lighter fluid on and come back through and hit it again. And I'll just repeat that process until I'm satisfied with the polish that I have there. So I can tell by looking at my hands now that I've moved towards the middle of that main bevel, and I'm just cleaning up that whole middle area, which is probably the easiest area to get to. It usually cleans up fairly quickly because there's no tight areas that you have to really get into. So here I'm just swiping all the junk off of the blade so that I can get a better view and try to see with the light where my scratches are or aren't. Alright, so we still got a few scratches out towards the top of the cutting edge, and apparently along the plunge line that I haven't got to yet, and still a little bit along the spine. So I will come back through and I'll clean all of that up as quickly and easily as I can, and those lines will just tell me where I need to focus my energy at this point. So we'll start with the cutting edge, and then we'll work our way around to the spine. I like backing my sandpaper with the leather strip because it's easy to flex and make sure that you're not hitting any areas that you don't want to be rubbing on, but also making sure that the sandpaper has a little extra backing, so it's got some extra strength to help you get past those grind lines. Not the grind lines, the machine marks. The machine marks are going to be the easiest marks to see when you're polishing because, one, they run the opposite direction of the marks we're putting in with the sandpaper, but also they're considerably deeper than the 1200 is. so you should be able to see them fairly easy. You can see that I just pulled that leather strip back a little bit up against my right hand thumb, and that's to pull that tight so that I can get really close up against that grind line without going over the grind line and washing out my grind. You can see my left hand twist back, putting pressure against my right hand thumb, and then I can use that thumb to rub against the grind line, ensuring that I'm getting as close as I can and getting out all those marks as easily as possible. So this line is going to tell me where the marks start. This next one shows me how far out they're going, and then up how high they're going, and then I can connect all those lines, like connect the dots, and know exactly where my machine marks are still at. I would say that along the grind line and out where the little swoop of the S grind is and where those two meet are probably the hardest parts to get the machine marks out of. It'll take just a little bit extra time, and you might have to do it a few extra times, but in the end, you're going to get all those marks out, and it's going to look really clean and really nice. Once again here, I'm just using the light to try to identify any marks that I've missed. Like I've said before, this is a very important step. You gotta identify the marks before you move on to the next grit, or else you're just gonna have to come back and do it all over again, and that's just pointless. So it looks like we've got the grind line finished up, and we're just going to come back through and do the plunge and get all of those little scratches out. And we're always using new fresh sandpaper to make sure that we are doing the most work possible and not just sitting there rubbing these marks with, old worn out paper. So cleaning up the plunge, as you can see here, I'm working more with my wrist than anything else. I'm just gonna kind of rotate my thumbs back and forth really quickly and slide up onto that little plunge ledge and make sure that I'm getting that whole rounded area and not just the flatter part towards the bevel. You have to polish the whole plunge area. It can be pretty easy for scratches to hide in the plunge, so really make sure that you're paying attention and getting all of those marks out. This corner right there is probably one of the hardest corners to get, especially if you're doing a traditional loveless style grind without the faded grind. It can be very tough to get that corner. So I'm going to start on that cutting edge and just try to get that little mark out that's out there. That should be easiest, and then I'll come back through and I'll clean up that tough part that's in that little corner. Once again, I'm just rotating my wrists and rocking my thumbs through those areas, trying to rub just those specific areas and not mess around and waste my time by rubbing on areas that I've already cleaned up. You can see me starting to do long strokes here. I'm trying to even out the marks so that I can tell if there's any scratches left behind and make sure that I'm getting all of those 1200 grit marks starting to move in the same direction now that I'm getting close to having all the machine marks out. So you can tell here that I'm doing a little bit of both elbow and wrist work. I'm moving back and forth and kind of twisting it up onto that plunge line. And I'm trying to just get that area. It's kind of a combination area, so you kind of got to do both movements to get in there and get the whole area cleaned up. Looks like I've only got one little mark left to get out, and then I can start focusing on the finish that I'm leaving behind with this 1200 grit before I move on to the next grit. You can tell that I'm not twisting my wrist here, so it's just all elbow and shoulders moving back and forth and scrubbing that area real close to the grind line. So when I start doing the long strokes and kind of moving it back and forth along this grind, I'm really just trying to straighten out these lines and get them all moving the same way so there's no fish hooks or anything that's going to stand out from my finish instead of it just being nice straight lines. So with nice fresh sandpaper, I'm going to start establishing these lines, moving from the plunge out towards the tip and making sure that everything is moving in one steady direction. Any wobbles or inconsistencies in your finish will just require extra work on the next grit. So make sure that you've got it all just nice and smooth and clean as you can on this grit before moving on to the next one. When my lighter fluid dries up, I will apply more lighter fluid and switch to a fresh area of the sandpaper just to make sure that I am having a consistent finish and I'm not having some messed up areas that are, part of the sandpaper is old and part of the sandpaper is new, and I'm getting two different looks to my finish. And now I'll come back through and I'll use one of those old and making sure that it's all old and used sandpaper, no fresh bits, and then I can soften those 1200 grit marks that were from the fresh stuff with the old stuff and kind of just add an extra layer of matteness, I guess. It's going to help to lighten up those lines a little bit, at least in my opinion. I seriously suggest using dull sandpaper after you've used the fresh sandpaper because it really helps it to make those marks easier to get out when you do move to your next grit. When all the marks are going the same direction, it makes them easier to blend in with each other. If they're all chaotic and wonky, then they're just going to stand out and you're going to notice right away that you don't have a nice finish. So I'm just going to continue to rub out the blade with this dull sandpaper until I am satisfied with the finish and that it all looks consistent and nice and matte. That's what I'm going for. I do like to spend a little bit more time on this than I probably have to, but in the past I've just had to come back through and redo grits so many times that at this point I just really like to do it right the first time. All right, so this is what the grind should look like. You got all those nice 1200 grit scratches all moving parallel to each other from the plunge line out towards the tip. And that's compared to, see if I can get this to rotate a little bit. I want to show you what it looks like compared to the 600 grit cork belt marks that we have going on this other grind right here. You can see those lines just moving from the cutting edge towards the center grind line, and those are those 600 grit marks. Any of the streaks that are running from the plunge to the tip are just, grease streaks from my hand. But yeah, that's the difference between your 600 grit marks from the grinder and your 1200 grit marks on from the sandpaper. All right, so I just wanted to add in a little clip of when I keep saying that I'm using the light to look for scratches. This is what I mean. I'm running the light from overhead, and this is just a light on my ceiling. I'm using that light to reflect off the surface and try to find these little hairline marks that are still left behind running from the cutting edge to the center grind line. Those are my 600 grit marks. That's what it's going to look like. Those are the marks that you're trying to get out. I'll just use this bar of light and I'll run it from side to side, from plunge to tip, and just really look for any of those marks. You can see that really dark one right there. That one was pretty bad. But you can see that in some light, it looks like there's nothing there, but then you twist the camera just a little bit, and then that light shows up, and you can see all of them. They just pop right out at you. Here we go again. See, they just pop right out. So I decided to add in this little clip from the side just so you could see kind of what it looks like from this angle. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here just because it's not the best angle at all. You can see me twisting my wrists there, and you can see me before kind of moving in the straight mark, or moving straight with just my elbows and my shoulders, like right here. And that's basically what I wanted to show you. It's just really just shoving the sandpaper into the steel and getting those marks out. Alright, so at this point I'm going to come back with the 2000 grit, and here I'm starting with the plunge, and I will work my way out towards the tip of the knife. The 2000 grit should remove the 1200 grit marks fairly quickly, but you will want to just keep looking, and it's important to make sure that you've got all those 1200 grit marks before you move on to the next step. Whenever the lighter fluid runs out, I will switch to a fresh section of sandpaper to ensure that I'm doing the maximum amount of work with the least amount of effort. So I started with the plunge, and then I worked the grind line, and now I'm working out around that S curve of the grind line towards the tip. And then I will make sure that I've got all the marks out and that it's all cleaned up, and then I can start making sure that all of my marks are long, smooth strokes running from one end to the other end. I don't want to keep you guys here just watching me scrub steel all day, so these are all the same steps that I did in the first grit. I'm just repeating the same steps on the second grit, and I'll show you here in a second what the 1200 grit marks look like compared to the 2000 grit marks, so that you can try to focus in and make sure you're identifying those marks before you move to the last step.
Alright, so I'm going to try to get the right angle here. So I don't know if you guys can see right there. There is a little, it almost looks like a gray line compared to everything else around it. That is your 1200 grit shining through the 2000 grit. So if I can get that mark back, that's the grit, or that's the kind of marks you're going to be looking for. Just little faint gray lines. You can actually see another one. Right, where's my pen at? Right here. So we've got a couple up there in the corner that I'll try to get out now. So while I got you guys set up here, I'm gonna show you what I'm doing here a little bit. I'm gonna basically just start scrubbing and scrubbing and scrubbing until I'm satisfied that the marks are gone. Then I move on to the next area, and I'll scrub and scrub and scrub until the marks are gone, and I'll repeat that until I've got everything out all over the place that I want all the scratches gone. And then I'm gonna come back through, and I'm gonna use long strokes to get all of these lines going the same direction, because I got some that are maybe going this way at an angle a little bit, and I've got some that are stopping short and then going back up. So I end up with little tiny fish hooks right where you stop and then you push back up. You're gonna have a little bit of a swirl and an inconsistency there. So by starting at the top of the plunge and just working with long strokes out towards the tip of the knife, you're going to remove those and cover them up, and you'll get nice long smooth lines that start here, travel all the way down towards your point, and that's what you want. And then Once I've done that with my fresh paper, and I've done that a couple of times to make sure that all of my lines are going the right way, I come back and I use some more like old beat up paper, and I'll use some of the worn out spots to come back through and just take off even more of the kind of blanking on the word right now. I'm gonna remove and lighten these scratches even more by using the beat up paper, because the fresh paper will leave nice bright marks, and you don't want those because they'll be harder to get out on your buffer.
All right, we're moving on to the 2500 grit part now. This will be probably your easiest stage to get out. You're only going from 2000 to 2500, so there's only a 500 grit difference. It should go pretty quick, but again, you really just got to make sure that you're getting all of those 2000 grit scratches out. I know that there's a lot of people that do a mirror polish just from 2000 grit, but personally I feel like those marks are just way harder to get out on the buffer, and it's easier to just take a few minutes to rub it out at 2500, and then you got a lot less work to do at the buffer, which is kind of a dangerous machine to use in the first place. So as you can see, I've already done the plunge and gone across the grind line. I'm all the way out at the tip already. So like I said, this 1200 grit step goes really quick. It's pretty easy, and it's definitely worth doing just to alleviate the trouble later on. So I'm going to start establishing my long lines by moving out towards the tip, and then from the tip just pushing back up towards the plunge line. And then I will just do nice long strokes from the plunge out towards the tip and get rid of any fish hooks that I might have had by doing that back and forth action. And this is going to help just make everything kind of satin, matte, flush, whatever you want to say. Just like the other grits, I like to do a few passes with fresh sandpaper to make sure I've got all of those lines going the right way, and it will help. The fresh sandpaper will just help to cut through any of those old marks that are wonky and cattywampus. On this last grit, I like to do a extra pass just to make sure that I've got all those 2000 grit marks, because they can hide pretty easily in the 2500 grit. So just by doing an extra pass is kind of like an insurance policy to make sure that I've got all the previous grits out. You can tell by looking at the grind next to it that the 2500 grit is almost a mirror polish, but just not quite. So here we're going to move back to that old kind of beat up sandpaper, and we're going to lighten those lines so that when we go to the buffer, the 2500 grit will be even easier to get out than it was if we hadn't done this step. So you can tell already that the cutting edge is considerably shinier than along the center grind line. And as I move towards that center grind line, you can actually see it starting to lighten up here. So that is the idea, is that we want to make these marks the least amount visible as possible. And then by moving to the buffer, we're going to eliminate those scratches even more. And then we'll just have a nice mirror polish, just completely immaculate and smooth. So I will go ahead and finish up this grind, and then I will do the other three, and then I will just head to the buffer. There's not really a point in watching the rest of this because it's just the same stuff like I said before from the previous steps.
So I just thought of one more thing that I wanted to point out. I'm never ever putting my thumb directly on top of the center grind line and moving it along there, because that will wash that out and you won't have a nice crisp grind line there anymore. I am putting my thumb right up against it and then also kind of pushing into it with this thumb to just jam it right up against there and find the ledge. Almost like you're grinding on a grinder. You're gonna push it up against until you feel some resistance, and then you'll just pull it right along that, and you will go kind of right around this little swoopty there, and you'll just boop and then zoop, and that is what you're seeing. If you see my hand following that line, I'm not actually on the line, I'm beside it and up against it.
All right, so we are to the buffer now. I will go ahead and use gloves because I feel that I like to use gloves. Some people don't like to use gloves. They're afraid it'll get caught up in the wheel, and that is, that's a legitimate concern. But as long as you are being safe and keeping everything away from there, the gloves will help protect your hands from the knife if the knife does get caught on the buffer and ripped out. So I'm using this is a worn out 8-inch muslin wheel. I'm using yellow sunsheen compound from Rio Grande, and we're just going to polish the knife. I'm going to grab the knife right now, that's why I'm not here. There it is. We will start with the tip and just kind of run that tip along. We're going to keep the blade point down so that if it does rip out of our hands, the blade will shoot down towards the ground and not towards us. We'll also stay below the center line of the buffer so that if the knife is ripped out of our hand, it doesn't shoot towards us, it's actually shooting away from us. It's going to get caught and ripped away from our body. That is a safety precaution, along with keeping the knife point down. If you have it sideways, the buffer can catch on the edge of the knife and that will rip it right out of your hand. It's a very dangerous machine. Be very careful. Use eye protection. A respirator is good too, because there's all kinds of funky stuff that is theoretically in that buffing compound that you would not want to breathe. So here you can see that it is buffing out really quickly, really easily. We went ahead and did a lot of extra steps before with the 2500 grit, making sure that all of the lines were moving the correct direction, making sure that we muted those lines by using dull sandpaper. And so all of those steps make it so that we don't have to spend as much time on this kind of dangerous machine. So pressure, the amount of pressure you're using is fairly important when you're using a buffer. You want to make sure that you're applying enough pressure that you're actually, doing the work and removing the scratches, but you don't want to put too much pressure because you can, wash away your grind. You can put pits into your blade. You can do a lot of bad stuff if you're using too much pressure. So you kind of want to get used to listening to the buffer and recognizing the sounds that it's making. And if it's making, aggressive, angry noises, you need to lighten up. And if you're not getting the scratches out, then you need to use more pressure. So when I'm buffing, I like to break each grind up into pretty much 3 parts. We'll have the part that is moving along the center grind line, the part that is running along the cutting edge, and then the plunge. I consider all of those kind of different areas. I have to hold the knife differently to get to different areas. Like right here, you can see I'm running along the clip of the knife, but I'm doing the cutting edge because if I want to do the center grind line, I have to switch it to the other hand and come from the other angle, so it's coming down onto that center grind line. See here, you can tell that I'm doing the center grind line on the main bevel, and to do the cutting edge on the main bevel on this side, I'll have to switch it to the other hand and do the exact opposite of what I'm doing here. So you will notice me raking my buffer very often. I like to make sure that I keep my buffing wheel clean. Any old compound that's balled up can do damage to your finish, so you'll really want to make sure that you're getting any crud that's stuck onto that wheel off of that wheel. You can see here that I'm holding it in the other hand now, and I'm getting that cutting edge on that main bevel. So that's what I mean by coming in and doing the exact opposite. I'll have to use my left hand as my dominant hand and come in and do all the areas that I couldn't do on the other side with my other hand. Here we can see all of the grinds buffed out and beautiful. We've done the center grind lines and we've done the cutting edges. We've switched back and forth between the right hand and the left hand, and now we'll do the plunges. Just turn that off and we'll switch wheels here, and then we'll get to work. So like I said, that old wheel was a 8-inch wheel, probably more like a 6-inch wheel now. And this is a 4-inch wheel. It will help me get into those plunges, and it is just a smaller wheel. It can fit into a tighter radius and get into those plunges easier without the fear of washing anything away. I'll just rake it, and then I'll put my buffing compound on it, and then I'll be able to get to work doing those plunges. So here I'm working on the bottom grind because I don't want that wheel to catch the top of the edge. If it catches the top edge, it can grab the knife and try to yank it out of your hand. So you got to be very careful and make sure that you're not doing anything dangerous with your buffer. By switching hands like this, I can ensure that I'm getting different angles and make sure that I'm cleaning up the knife really well and getting all the spots that I need to. All right, there we go. We got all 4 grinds rubbed out and polished up, and we got them buffed out, and they are at a mirror polish. This is what we're going for right here. So we've got it all polished out from the plunge to the tip, from the center grind line down to the cutting edge on all 4 grinds. This is the finish that we were working so hard to achieve. I'd like to thank everybody for watching. I know it's been a long video, but there's been a lot of information to go over, so I hope that you found this video helpful and concise, and thank you for watching. Thanks to anybody subscribing and hitting that bell notification. I will put more videos out in the future. Bye.